Yes, I'm doing the Professor Oak challenge in Stories 2, but because it's in a Monster Hunter setting, I'm calling it the Ecologist challenge. To briefly explain, the idea is that you have to fill out your Pokedex, or in this case your monsterpedia, as much as you can before you progress to the next major section. In Pokemon it's gyms, in this game it's major bosses in each chapter. What makes this challenge hard in Pokemon is you have to evolve all your catches to fill out your dex before progressing. But because I can't evolve Monsties, I have another condition in the challenge. Not only do I have to fill out the monsterpedia, but the monsterpedia as well. The only real rules here are if I can obtain a Monstie and beat any monster, I have to go for it before moving on to the next chapter. The second rule is that I can't use glitches, which means I can't get the early Anjanath. Pretty sure that was a demo exclusive anyway. So for the first chapter, all I had to do was get all the Monsties available without much effort and beat the Blue Menace, as it counts as a separate entry in the Monsterpedia, as will the other special monsters as we go along with this challenge. Once we beat the Rage Raid Anjanath, it's added to the Pedia and the next chapter is about to change things up. In Alcala, we collect more Monsties, hunt more monsters, and come across our first real obstacles in this challenge, the Royal Monsters, Tigrex and Monoblos, both of which you can make retreat into dens, and because of that, we have no choice but to go for them. Tigrex is first, and the problem with fighting him is he can attack twice per turn in Rage mode, so I had to play the smart by not going for double attacks each time he would use his strongest attack. I had a Basarios with me since he can take a few hits and inflict statuses, and as a result, I was able to beat the Tigrex but didn't get it to retreat despite the paintball, so I had to fight it again. Once I did though, I was able to beat it again, and this time got it to retreat, allowing me to get its egg. Monoblos, on the other hand, I thought would be a nightmare since it would dig a lot, and at this point in the game, I didn't have access to sonic bombs. But to my surprise, this fight was nowhere near as bad as I thought. All I had to do was guard and have Basarios out when the Monoblos was digging. My team was also at level 16, so I took hits pretty well. I didn't get it to retreat on the first attempt, but I was able to consistently beat it, and 2 attempts later, it retreated and I got my own Monoblos egg. After that, I decided to go in a multiplayer quest and fight an Anjanath and get its egg earlier than normal. It's a good thing I checked as it's easy to miss. I also beat the immovable boulder and the flying fury as my last 2 entries before moving on to the Rage Raid Rathian. And of course, after beating it and adding it to the Pedia, we enter chapter 3, but don't go on to Loloska quite yet as there are a few things to get first. I beat a Rathian to add it to the Pedia and go to fight the Solemn Mountain. This fight shouldn't be that bad, right? Right? Wrong! This fight was a big wall for me, and the biggest reason is because of the AI partner Alwyn and his Legiana. They kept going for the wrong attacks, which kept ending in our demise. It took me a total of 8 attempts to finally down this beast because I got lucky with him not aiming for Legiana as much. You know, in hindsight, I should have just triggered the next part of the story so that I could fight the thing alone, since I was now in chapter 3. Too late for that, I guess. Anyway, I got a Rathian and proceed to Loloska and grab a few eggs before reaching Kawan Village. This chapter is just about to get harder. You see, there are a good number of Monsties we can get in this chapter, but just like the last chapter, there are 2 royal monsters I have to get, but we'll work on those later. We progress in this chapter so we can get a few eggs like Nursilla, Tobikadachi, and Red Kezu. We also beat the Rage Raid Celtis Queen since it doesn't end the chapter. After that, we do a multiplayer quest to get an early Legiana egg. I can move on to chapter 4, right? You must have forgotten about the royal monsters, Gammoth and Zinogre. I was nervous, especially for Gammoth, because not only does it have a lot of health, but it also deals so much damage that it can take you out in 1 hit. So I tried my hand at Gammoth first and immediately get destroyed. Then I tried my hand at Zinogre, which I was told would be harder, but to my surprise, I already had it at low health and got it to retreat on my first try. That was way easier than Gammoth. I got the egg and hatched the Zinogre, but there is still the Gammoth to deal with. The first strategy I had was Rathian. It's a speed fire Monstie that can deal with Gammoth just fine on its own. Keyword, on its own. There was one problem I kept running into over and over again. Avinia and Frostfang. They kept dying on me every time whenever Gammoth was using Snow Stomp, which hits everyone. Frostfang had tenacity, which helped, but it wasn't enough as the skill only lasts once per battle. After that, I looked up to see what other people were doing to get an early Gammoth, and I started seeing what people were using. Aptonoth. Well, as much as I don't like it, I had to get an Aptonoth to help with this fight. I also taught it some speed moves to help with double attacks. I would get guaranteed knockdowns, but that wasn't enough as we still kept losing no matter how many attempts it was taking. Avinia was really dragging me down, and having her with me only made this fight harder. I've even done some research, and some have said to just wait until you have Reverto or go alone. That would have to be in the next chapter, which I can't go to until I have this Gammoth registered in the Pedia and get its egg. I was starting to think that this wasn't possible. Maybe I should just just write it off and only do this fight when I have no AI partner. After all, the rules state that if I can go for it, I have to go for it. And Gammoth being impossible wouldn't be against the rules. Or would it? That's when I had another idea. Because the strategy with the Aptonoth was starting to work, I was thinking, maybe instead of one Aptonoth, I could use a full team of them, all with speed moves so they can at least be useful with double attacks. And since I was using Gunlance, building up kinship would be easy, but I didn't have any kinship skills, so I had an alternative, the mounting charm. I never needed this normally because it wasn't all that useful, but now it became useful for this specific scenario. So here was the strategy. I would fill up the kinship gauges on all my Aptonoths so that their kinships would be ready to knock down Gammoth when it's about to use Snow Stomp. It doesn't cancel out the attack, but it does delay it. So I would use the kinship attack with my army of Aptonoths to knock down the Gammoth every time. And even when it did attack, it wasn't that consequential because of the amount of kinships that knocked it down for free damage. I kept repeating this process until eventually I beat it. It didn't retreat to its den, but I couldn't believe it. This strategy actually worked, but I felt that I needed to level up a bit more to consistently beat the Gammoth and make it retreat. After taking the time to grind my team, I was level 29, as well as Avinia, and my team of Aptonoths level 28. I didn't get the Gammoth to retreat on the second try, but on the third try, I managed to do it using a full party of Aptonoths and was able to get the Gammoth egg. So after that, I was finally able to move on, beat the Rage Raid Legiana, and get to chapter 4. Alright, I forgot about the special monsters. I was supposed to fight them before progressing, but I was so focused on the Gammoth that I forgot. These fights were hard, but they'll never be as hard as the Gammoth for me. So now in chapter 4, I obtained some more eggs and even got some from the previous area that weren't available prior, like Barioth. But now it was time to take on the Royal Brute Tigrex. This was a hard fight because he can attack twice per turn, but since I had experience with a much harder fight, this wasn't as bad, and as a result, I got it to retreat on the first try. After getting the egg and fighting more monsters to add to the pedia, we beat up some gangsters and explored some Everdens to get a couple Monsties you normally wouldn't get until later, those being Ash Ketchawacha, Ruby Basarios, and Gravios. Then we take on the last royal monster, White Manablos. We beat it but didn't get it to retreat until the second try. Once we get the egg and hatch it, we finish up the rest of the chapter and beat the Black Diablos at Lamure Tower. Funny enough, I tried to check to see if you could get Black Diablos before chapter 5, but it turns out you can't until then. Once in chapter 5 though, we do get the Black Diablos egg, and then we go back to Hakalo Island since we can fly and grab the Green Narga egg and the Crimson Peko egg. And once again, I was supposed to fight some special monsters before chapter 5, but missed them. We fight the Imperial Saber and the Valiant Augur, both of which were a bit challenging. I tried to take on the Insatiable Beast, but I couldn't because it was very hard, and I didn't even need to fight it yet because it's a chapter 5 subquest. So I instead beat the Rage Raid Peko and go on to Pomor Garden to find more eggs. I also buy Palamute tickets and go to the Palamute Den to grab a Palamute, Black Gravios, and a Mizutsune early. The last egg I grab in this chapter is the Lagaicris, so we hatch it and... Hold on a second. Hello? Yeah? What? What do you mean I missed the Celtics back in chapter 3? Yeah, I guess I technically failed this challenge because I skipped something that I needed in order to fill the pedia in the last 2 chapters. But I won't stop this video because of that mistake. I went over there and took down the Celtics with ease. But now it was time for my rematch with the Insatiable Beast. Now that I had Kyle with me, this fight wasn't that bad, but it was still very hard. Especially since he had Kyle at 1 heart left before we beat him. Talk about close call. After that, we take on the Horned Horror and the Flashy Dasher, which I honestly thought would have been a Gypteros, but nope, it's a Green Nargacuga. Once we took care of that, we easily beat the Rage Raid Mizutsune. In chapter 6, we grab a lot of eggs to hatch and fight more monsters to add to the pedia. After that, I finish up with hunting more monsters and then beat Nergigante to complete the chapter. I grab a Nergi egg, hatch it, and then go into a multiplayer den to grab a Stygian Zinogre egg early. Then I go to fight a special monster that I missed yet again in the last chapter, the Treacherous Wolf, which wasn't even that hard. The Thunderous Terror wasn't bad either since I did a lot of double attacks. Then I go on to beat the Rage Raid Glavenus, Glacial Ignactor, and Basil pretty easily. I then went to make a Glavenus retreat and then grab an egg. We beat up more gangsters and now on to the final chapter. Most of this chapter was filling out the final entries for this challenge, grabbing the final eggs and getting the final monsters. But when it was getting down to the wire with the entries, I checked to see which ones I was missing. For some reason, I was missing a Nahabra Red, a Vespoid, and the last one I'll mention in a bit. So I find where they are and beat them. Looking at the Monsterpedia now, it's just about full with the only thing left being the Great Barrel Felines before the final boss, but I can't seem to find them. And it's unclear whether they're available in the postgame or not. Not even the forums I found said much about it. I even tried looking in all the places they would spawn but found nothing. So I had to conclude that they're only found in the postgame. As for the monsterpedia, it's as full as I can get as most of the other Monsties are locked to the postgame. So all that's left now is to add Altura to the monsterpedia. And once we do, we beat the game. If you guys want to see more Stories 2 challenges, here's one that'll catch your interest.